Hi guys, welcome to 9th grade auto shop. I'm Mr. Fields. You know, today we're going to do basic engines, and your learning objectives today, you're going to be able to list the basic parts of a small engine, and you'll be able to state the 4 strokes of an engine. Everybody got that? Good. Is everybody awake today?
No.
This first period? No. Should be good. So everybody, you already know, we do a journal entry every day, so get out your journals and let's answer the questions on the board. If you guys don't know the answers to the questions, feel free to try to come up with something. Hand them out now while you guys are doing your drill. How's everybody doing? Good. Everybody got some? Anybody here?
Yes.
All right. Who wants to read the first question? Go ahead.
What type of fuel is used in a basic engine, and can engines run on other fuels?
Who has an answer? Anybody have an answer? You got one? Go.
Gasoline.
Gasoline.
Yeah, and I said for other sources of fuel, diesel, and then I guess some cars can run on electricity and water, but because that's not a standard engine, probably.
Probably not. Some run on propane. Yeah, there's a lot of other fuel sources. How about the next question? Who wants to read the next question? Go ahead, Mallory, read the next question.
How is the fuel converted into power in a small engine?
Who knows how fuel is converted into power? Go ahead.
Combustion.
Right. So when combustion happens, what happens in the engine?
Small explosions.
Yeah. And then that takes a mechanical energy and a chemical energy and turns it into a mechanical energy. Piston moves, right?
Gas.
Turns it into rotational energy. It turns the transmission in a car, drives the wheels, right? So we take one fuel source that's chemical and we make it into mechanical so we can get somewhere, right? And we're riding horses. And we're using a hand thatcher on the lawn. Alright. Let's watch a video about the basic strokes of an engine. Huh? There.
A basic lesson in the fundamentals of a 4-stroke EFI gas engine may be helpful to your understanding of Mercury products. Here are the basic components of every 4-stroke gas engine: a piston, a connecting rod, a crankshaft. As the piston travels up and down in the cylinder, this lateral motion is turned into a rotating motion at the crankshaft. The longer the stroke of the piston, the larger the displacement of gas and air occurs in the cylinder. To propel that piston, we need to ignite a tiny bit of gas and a whole lot of air. This creates expansion inside the cylinder. The fuel delivery system consists of an air intake manifold, valves, intake and exhaust, a fuel injector, and a spark plug. A four-stroke engine is called a four-stroke because 4 up and down motions are needed to complete the cycle. In the first stroke, the piston travels downward as the intake valve opens and a mixture of air from the atmosphere and a metered amount of gas from the electronic fuel injector enter the cylinder. This is called the intake stroke. On the second stroke, the piston travels upward, compressing the air and fuel to make a highly combustible mixture. This is called the compression stroke. At this point, the spark plug fires, sending the piston downward from the expansion of the air and gas mixture. This is the combustion stroke. The fourth stroke is the exhaust stroke. As the piston travels upward, the exhaust valve opens to release the burned air-fuel mixture. When the piston reaches the top of this stroke, the intake valve opens and the cycle begins all over again. It takes 1 up and down motion, or 2 strokes of the piston, to create 1 revolution of the crankshaft. RPMs, or revolutions per minute, is how many times the crankshaft rotates within that minute. At wide open throttle, the crankshaft may turn at 5,000 RPMs, or a dizzyingly 83 times per second. Meanwhile, the piston traveled up and down 166 times in that same second. Want to see how fast that is?
Yeah.
Now, that's fast. Let's see it again. Amazingly, the four-stroke EFI engine does this smoothly, quietly, and reliably for years and years of operation.
So, who can tell me what the first stroke of the engine was? Intake stroke? Whoop. Oh. I spaced that one. So what's the intake stroke do? What happens during the intake stroke?
A fuel and air mixture is drawn into the combustion chamber.
Yep, so a small amount of fuel. So in this video they talked about fuel injectors. Small engines like these actually use carburetors. So we suck. When that takes place, air gets drawn through the carburetor past a really small port and it creates a vacuum, and it's called the Venturi effect. We'll cover that later. But anyway, so the fuel and air go in and it's drawn in during the intake, and then once the piston's all the way down and all the air and fuel's in there, we have to have the next stroke. So the piston has to come back up, and it's the compression stroke. So fuel and air mixture is compressed. What's the next stroke? Once it's all up there, compressed, what's the next one?
Spark ignites.
Spark, power,
Combustion.
combustion. What happens during that? You kind of were talking about
Well, it compresses and then the spark ignites very smallly and it lights the air and the tiny bit of fuel and creates an explosion.
it. So your spark plug, you can hand it around. Spark plug ignites your fuel, and then once it ignites the fuel, as it heats, we all know chemicals get warm, what happens? Atoms move fast. You guys learning that stuff in science yet? Expands. So it gets real hot really fast, expands. And when it expands, it forces the piston back down during the power stroke. Once it's all down, it's full of all that burnt fuel. The weights on the crank, this crank doesn't really have weights, we can look at this one here. It has weights, so once it's burned and thrown down, the weights are going to keep the centrifugal energy moving and keep that rotational force and push the piston back up during the exhaust stroke. So the valve will open and all the exhaust will get pushed out the exhaust during the exhaust stroke. Right? So first stroke is what?
Intake.
Second stroke?
Compression.
Third stroke,
Power.
fourth stroke.
Exhaust.
So, some basic parts. We have crankshaft, cylinder head, I have case, sorry, I was reading that wrong. Cylinder block, connecting rod. So your connecting rod, does anybody know what your connecting rod does? Let me read. Connects the piston to the crankshaft. So you have a crankshaft and a piston. Here's a piston. This is a crankshaft off a 2-cylinder engine, so it would have 2 of these mounted on here, and they would rotate around and they move up and down. You guys can hand them around. And what opens and closes so air can go in and out of the chamber?
The valve.
The valve. So here's a valve. You guys can look at a valve here. I'll hand it over here. So attached to your crankshaft, or driven by your crankshaft is going to be your camshaft. So your camshaft is what makes your valves open and close. So this camshaft is driven on a gear. Like a lot of people have cars in here, they might have timing belts. And that's connected from the crankshaft to the timing shaft to make your valves go up and down. A lot of these you're going to cover more in your online text that you're working on. Yeah.
So you have they talked about that being a 4-stroke. So when people talk about like a 2-stroke or other stuff like that, is it the same 4 parts? Just
Yeah, the parts are the same, but
I mean like parts like the stages. Like how would that be different in the different strokes? I mean, how can you have
different.
Yeah.
So a 2-stroke works a little different. We'll cover it later, but essentially when your piston moving up and down, the crank creates a vacuum as the piston goes up. And when that creates a vacuum, the fuel's drawn in, and there's a bypass in the block. So when the piston comes down, it pushes that air-fuel mixture, it's drawn back up into the chamber. And then the weights move it, and then it combusts. So it only has 2 strokes, an up and a down stroke. Some people think it's more efficient. There's no way to put oil like all these. You have your crankcase, which is the back one. Your crankcase is right here, which houses on a small engine, it houses your cam, your connecting rod, and your crankshaft. That would be filled with oil. So on the piston that was handed around, if you saw on the bottom of that piston, there's what's called a dipper, and that dips into the oil that sits in the bottom of the crankcase, and it throws oil all around inside the engine so it can lubricate itself. Cars you guys have or drive, those cars, or your parents drive, have oil pumps, so they pump through valleys. We'll learn more about that stuff as you work through your text too. You'll see more about that stuff. Yeah.
Is that the oil you have to get changed every once in a while?
On your car, yeah.
Yeah, okay. Let's see.
So, I handed out a handout. Some of you have probably already started working on it. Let's go through it, see if you can label the 4 strokes. There's some pictures of some basic parts on there. I'm sure everybody started working on them already. See if you can name them, and then flip it over, and on the back, it's alright. I didn't say don't work on them, so hey, shame on me. So flip them over, just start filling them out. If anybody has questions about something or doesn't know if they know what one is, go ahead and ask. Work as a table.
Okay. Do you want
You guys can ask questions, talk to each other.
Exhaust is the last. That's what I thought.
that one?
Adam.
I think it's 3, 1, 4, 10. Well, because ours must have been like it's lighting in number 3, so that price now 1 because the NPD.
Yeah.
So this is
Shell commercial?
NPD,
They put additives in the fuel.
fuel and air in the back.
Some valves will get carbon buildup, so when your fuel burns, when it burns off and gets real hot, right? So you get carbon atoms in the fuel, which is a mixture of your hydrogen and your carbon that's inside the fuel.